Welcome to CXPA Studio. I'm Gabe Smith, CCXP. I'm the content manager for the Customer Experience Professionals Association. So each week, we're going to be bringing you conversations with customer experience thought leaders and helping to arm you with information and case studies that can help to shed light on your business challenges and help you overcome those challenges, in addition to connecting you with global CX professionals. So my guest this week is Stephanie Thum, CCXP. So some of you may know Stephanie from her work with CXPA and also with Qualtrics. So welcome to the program, Stephanie.
Hi, thanks very much. Happy CX Day, everybody.
So Stephanie, hoping you could just give us a walkthrough of your career up until this point. Tell us how you got to where you are now and what you're doing now.
Oh, wow. I have a background in journalism and broadcast news. And that sort of led me into PR and marketing and eventually into business development. And there was a time about 20 years ago when I was working for Ernst & Young, now called EY. They established a cadre of up-and-coming executives from inside the organization to go out and meet one-on-one with clients to find out what was going well and what wasn't so well. And that was our early kind of VOC client interview program. And that's kind of where I was bitten by the CX bug, so to speak. Because in the course of those interviews, we learned a lot about the fact that their experiences and whether or not they decided to buy. We learned that it had nothing to do with proposals, it had nothing to do with advertising, and it had everything to do with, could they get someone on the phone? Could they find a place to park? Were they getting the right bills? So from there, it sort of grew through E&Y. I went to work in law for a while. My family moved to Washington, D.C. about 9 years ago. Threw my hat in the ring when we moved here for a role with a federal government agency. Did that for a while. Went to work for Qualtrics, and now I have my own company.
Wow. Fantastic. So you've been at this for a long time, and you said you threw your hat in the ring into the federal government role. So tell us a little bit more about that job specifically. What were you doing at the time? What was the scope of your work?
Sure. This was 2012. And it was really before anyone had heard the term customer experience in government. So I actually became one of the federal government's first agency level heads of customer experience. At that time, there was only one other person at the United States Department of Education and Federal Student Aid who was leading a customer experience, a bona fide customer experience effort. And it just so happened that the leader of my agency, his mother was Lillian Vernon. I don't know if you remember the Lillian Vernon catalog company. Some of your viewers might remember that. But and this was the person who hired me at Ex-Im Bank. He grew up understanding that, when you take care of your customers take care of you. So he brought that with him into the federal government. And that was one of the reasons why he advocated for this role at Ex-Im Bank. And, I met with him. We really hit it off and kind of had a mind meld and understood each other. And that was a brand new role in a time when people really didn't know what CX was about. And it was up to me to kind of get things started.
Wow. And so how did you go about doing that? I mean, tell me about, what was happening at the time.
Right. So, the first order of business is to do a round robin. You've got to sit down. And that was what I did. I sat down with all of the senior executives because I was part of that senior executive team to kind of get their views and find out about their world and kind of figure out, because this was going to be a big change for the organization at a time when they might not have thought that resources should be going to CX. So we needed to kind of understand what the roadblocks might be. So I met individually with each one of those. It was not, of course, it wasn't an easy work. This is never easy. Anyone who they're going to come into this thinking this is going to be easy and glamorous and sexy. It is not. It absolutely is not. But, we were able to really put some good work together. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is the governance framework that we were actually able to stand up. That's something to latch on early on because government does governance really well. Imagine that,
Yeah.
Of course, they do governance really well, but we set up a governance framework that actually helped us to reduce our customer wait times. We started integrating that into our public-facing strategic plans and performance reports. And we were one of the first agencies to actually start doing that. And now all high-impact federal government agencies are required to do that as part of the new guidance from the White House to agencies on CX.
Wow. Wow. That's fascinating. So you started your role in 2012, and you mentioned that you were one of the first, CX leaders in government. Was that the beginning of CX in government, or does it have its roots prior to that?
Right. That is absolutely not the beginning, the very beginning. And I love talking about the history of this because we all stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us.
Absolutely.
And we are
Absolutely.
all building on work. So there's really no one pioneer in anything. But when I look back on the history, President Clinton in 1993 issued the first executive order to executive branch agencies, instructing them to do things like surveys and customer service plans and to begin to put that mindset into place. From there, we have grown into a huge new inflection point in the United States federal government. What's also interesting about this, and I learned this during my time at Qualtrics and got to work face to face, elbow to elbow with some governments around the world that want to integrate these practices and principles. And a lot of times they're doing it better than the United States federal government. So I love that this is something that is not just with the US federal government, but it's being embraced worldwide because government belongs to everyone. We are all customers of government, and we do have a right and we have a responsibility to expect the efficiencies and the good things that these practices and principles can bring us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so I love that you've mentioned that this is something that governments around the world are doing. Is this something that is a focus on CX? Do you see that this is really a nonpartisan push?
Yeah, I mean, so no matter where you are, whether you're private sector or in government, there is a business side.
Yeah.
There's a business side to running a government agency, just like there's a business side to running a for-profit organization. And every CFO needs to show efficiencies, needs to show cost savings. And that's what these practices and principles of CX as a business discipline can help us get to. So if you've got to sell it like that, because we're all selling something when we're trying to build the CX work, right? We're all selling something. If that's the way that it needs to be sold, then we absolutely have opportunities there that are worth exploring.
So tell me a little bit more about, since you've left government, you said you've seen a lot of progress. Do you see you mentioned a couple agencies that really had that focused, CX role when you started back in 2012. Have you really seen that has grown, that CX is being embraced by other federal agencies here in the United States, and there's a standardization framework that other agencies are adopting right now?
Well, there's definitely a huge push for it. We were talking about that new inflection point just a moment ago. There is definitely a wave right now, and it's coming from a few different sides onto the executive branch federal government agencies in the form of the Office of Management and Budget. They are responsible for overseeing the implementation of the president's vision for executive branch agencies. OMB has issued formal written guidelines to federal agencies to incorporate the practices and principles of CX as a business discipline. So you ask about standardization. That is a form of how they're trying to standardize the implementation of these practices in the fabric of agency cultures. That's not the only driving force, though. You've got the president's management agenda formally has a goal on customer experience. It is actually listed as customer experience. And you've also got inspectors general and the Government Accountability Office that are advocating for agencies to embrace things like VOC and governance where that's concerned. And interestingly, we're also seeing now the passage of laws that are actually designed to force is kind of a bad word, but really make agencies pay more attention to
Strongly encourage, compel.
Okay, yes. For example, the Taxpayer First Act, which was passed last June of 2019, sometime in 2019. It actually, you can look at this in the legislation. I think it's on page 1,000. The Congress has actually legislated the on-hold messages for the IRS to play when customers call the agency. So this is how strongly this law, it is a law. It's been passed. It's been signed into law. This is something that the IRS has to pay attention to now, along with several other things that are written into the legislation about CX. So it's coming at the U.S. federal government from different angles. There are a lot of different driving forces, which brings us to that inflection point.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about this, the concept of accountability. And you mentioned the Government Accountability Office. So how are agencies held accountable for their customer experience performance? How does that work?
Right. So when inspectors general who serve at the pleasure of the president and the Government Accountability Office, which is these are two separate organizations, but they both sort of exist to improve the efficiency and to improve federal government. When they go and do, whenever they go and look into management and operational practices at agencies, their findings become public. They're published on the web along with recommendations. Of course, the agency has an opportunity to review these before they actually go public, and they can write a letter in those reports that says whether or not they agree or disagree with the findings of the IT and the GAO. From there, it's public accountability. So if the recommendations are not embraced, and if something isn't done with them over time, then there will likely be another report that says, another public report that says, Department of blank still has 15 open recommendations after 5 years of having this report. So the feet are held to the fire. You know, there is that
Okay.
public accountability. The same thing with OMB and the new circular that I mentioned a while ago that standardizes things. There is a call for the public now to see the operational data, the customer experience operational data, and the customer experience data, the voice of the customer data that comes into these agencies. That's being standardized. It's going to be, and it is actually, their first data has now been published on performance.gov. So it is out there, feet are being held to the fire, but we are still just in the beginning. There's still
Yeah.
so much work to do, so much development. Don't expect this work to be perfected in the next 8 or 10 years. I think it's going to take that long.
Wow. Wow. That's fascinating. One question I have, you mentioned voice of the customer. Tell me, how does voice of the customer work in government? Is that similar to how voice of the customer programs work in private companies, or are there other? I imagine there are probably other complexities that come to play.
Just like in the private sector, VOC in government comes in all shapes and sizes. You know, and just like in the private sector, government also has partners. They have intermediaries that need to be surveyed or brought to a roundtable. But the thing about doing the VOC work in the United States federal government, it's not like this around the world, but this actually becomes a barrier in the United States federal government. But OMB is trying to help agencies sort of figure out how to simplify this process. But for the United States federal government, there is a complicated interagency process that requires agencies to get approval on the surveys that they send to customers. And sometimes that
Okay.
process can take 9 months to a year to get
Wow.
approval for a survey. There are different ways to go about getting surveys fast-tracked, but there are lots of rules and finer points around actually getting that work done that sometimes preclude agencies from actually putting in the paperwork and getting started.
Wow. With such a long timeline, I can imagine that perhaps some of the questions you set out to originally ask may be moot or obsolete by the time you can actually get the survey out to the field.
That is a classic argument from agencies. Absolutely. And of course, this is required. This is a law. This is the Paperwork Reduction Act, which is a law.
Right.
So it's not something that you can get around. It's something
Right.
that you have to do. So when you're doing the CX work in federal government and you need to incorporate CX, you've got to be able to partner internally as well as externally with the people who can, and you've got to plan. You've got to plan it well in advance, knowing that you've got to get this done. There are just lots of other things that you have to take care of. When I was doing VOC in the private sector, it wasn't nearly as complicated.
Right.
There are definitely some differences there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, with the increased focus in the government on CX, I think the viewers would love to hear, do you know of any success stories? I mean, I think, sometimes there are negative connotations that some people may have with certain, government agencies. Are there any success stories that are out there that you can share?
When we think about CX as a business discipline, there are three really big things that have been surfacing for me lately that I'm so excited about. When I take a look at what government is doing that actually private sector might be able to get a lesson or two from. And those three things are it's one of the things I'm most excited about is CX practices are being incorporated into the procurement ecosystem. Meaning that GSA, for example, has what they call a federal marketplace strategy. GSA is an agency that serves other agencies. And one of the things they do is they help agencies buy products and services in the ecosystem. But the rules are complicated. The regulations are complicated. But what they're trying to do through the federal marketplace strategy is journey mapping, VOC, because they want to clear away some of the maze that keeps agencies from working with great suppliers and vendors. You need great suppliers and vendors to create great experiences for customers. So we've got to be able to clear that away. I'm so happy about the work that's being done with the federal marketplace strategy. Similarly, there's a new President's Management Agenda goal on frictionless acquisition, which has some of the same flavors. So we'll see how that unfolds too. The second thing is, government has always been good at doing this, but I don't think has really received much recognition. And that is how they go out and seek out public feedback in the formation of policies. If you take a look at the Federal Register, everyone has access to the Federal Register. Federalregister.gov, I think, is the website address. Agencies are required to go out and ask the public, what is your feedback on this policy? That's something that if government can go out and say, what do you think about this policy? How's it going to impact you? And you're going to be you're customers of our agency, then I think private sector companies can take a lesson from that too. And the third thing is, and I was so excited to see this, the Veterans Administration inspectors general are now using systemically, this is part of every audit that they do for local VA hospitals. They take a look at employee data, employee experience data, and customer experience data, and they use that as information and to get a feel for what is the business and operational risk that's in front of us as an organization. That is incredible. That is a huge breakthrough, because that is the use of the things that we do in our profession that goes beyond a website, that goes beyond being able to buy something somewhere. This is government using customer voice, employee voice, and really realizing that you guys may be able to tell us about some of our risks before we see it.
Yeah.
Really important. And I'm so excited about that work. And to me, those are the biggest success stories that are coming out of the US federal government right now.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I can see, I think the VA has like 500,000 employees, I read, or something like that. I mean, just a vast organization. So the fact that they're utilizing employee feedback is wonderful. That was actually going to be my next question. Is that, a practice that you're seeing across other government agencies as well? Is this idea of really, utilizing your employees to keep a pulse on what's going on with customers, while also trying to improve that employee experience as well?
There are agencies that are doing that, and I commend them, and big applause. There's still a lot of room to grow. There's still a lot of work that can be done. Just for the record, though, we should know that there is a federal employee viewpoint survey that is administered every year to federal employees. So there is one big overarching survey that goes out, but that's once a year. So we all know that, especially right now, employee feedback is probably going to ebb and flow with the time. So it's really great idea to keep a pulse far more than once a year on what employees are seeing and feeling and experiencing. So a lot of good work being done, but still a lot of good work to be done.
Any other topic that you really feel passionate about discussing, that you think other CX pros would be interested in?
There's only one other quick thing that comes to mind. There was a report that came out earlier this year on how CX teams were going to be cut back. The US federal government is actually beefing up CX. There's another lesson to be learned there, that there is value in the work that credentialed CX professionals can bring to the table. So if you're looking for efficiencies, if you're looking for opportunities, credentialed CX professionals will be the people who can lead you to finding those.
Fantastic. I mean, I can see, credentials are important in any organization, and, certainly a certification like CCXP can say, this person has the knowledge and skills needed to lead a CX program. But I can certainly see how important that becomes in government when you have, a lot of layers, and needing to really understand how to make sure that those silos are broken down and to get adoption.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. So Stephanie, I know that you write about CX and government. If anyone who is viewing this conversation wants to learn more, where can they find out some more about what you do and just learn more about CX and government?
Sure. So you can look at my website, practical-cx.com. I also blog regularly on LinkedIn. So follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, and there'll be plenty of opportunities to check stuff out. And hopefully for the folks that are watching this, we'll eventually have an opportunity to collaborate.
Also, if you're interested in learning more about CXPA, you can visit us at cxpa.org. You can become a member to network with other experienced CX pros like Stephanie. So hope to see you there, and thanks for joining us.
Bye.